Tupac didn't have all his paperwork legally that they promised him, meaning Death Row and David Kenner. But Charles Ogletree was going at it for Tupac. This was the beginning of the end at Death Row. Let's get into some of this straight game.
Life is like those cards. It's not what you dealt, but how you play it. Play each situation correctly. I remember they used to laugh at a brother.
Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. It's your boy DELRAY, Richardson, platinum artist, platinum songwriter, Straight Game TV. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate your time. Do me a favor, click on the thumbs up button. Also, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And like I always say, if you want to be one of the first people notified when I drop some of this straight game, please do me a favor and click on what appears to be that little bell notification right below this video. I'm going to get right into it. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been thoroughly researching certain situations, and you can see through the situation involving Tupac and his paperwork and what he had versus what he didn't have. As far as, because like I said, a lot of times when you want to proceed with something, any kind of discrepancies with your contract, with your, any kind of contract in that arena, as far as, music, entertainment, and things like that, you can have the contract, you can give it to your lawyer, say, hey, look, read this over, or this is what we're trying to fight for or against, right? They didn't give Tupac that other contract, the one that I showed you in regards to what he signed. And the reason why I can see that now is because of this. Ladies and gentlemen, this is very important. Check this out. Watch this. Look. So now, remember, they tried to put David Kenner up as, the guy who was, the all-powerful over Tupac. Simply not true. Look, Kenner began to represent Tupac as his entertainment lawyer. As his entertainment lawyer only. David Kenner was the person who prepared that agreement, along with the bail agreement, along with the amending agreement as far as Tupac's record label was concerned, out the gutter, right? And so David Kenner, in representing Tupac as his entertainment lawyer and his lawyer for civil and criminal cases in California. Remember, like I said, once again, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. and so many other people had put out the rumor that Kenner was representing him for his appeal. That's simply not true. But Tupac asked Charles Ogletree to continue to represent him as well. Mr. Ogletree was like I said before, a Harvard law professor who taught Michelle Obama and Barack Obama, among many other lawyers who have come out to be great attorneys from that perspective, who went to Harvard, right? So Ogletree had told someone that he repeatedly wrote letters to Death Row asking to see the contract Tupac had signed with Death Row in prison and to negotiate a formal contract under more conscionable circumstances. But all his efforts he made, he said, were met with silence, diversions, and outright misrepresentations. Now let's take that under the microscope. So when you understand that, remember the agreement that Tupac signed, the formal one that David Kenner had prepared. See, now check this out. The reason why I said that, because if Tupac, how sometimes you might sign something to say, oh yeah, we'll get you a copy. You know what I mean? I don't think Tupac had a copy of it. I think he signed it and he was so gung-ho about being able to be released from prison and signing that. Like I said, I think it probably was backdated, if you will. When Tupac got out of jail, that contract right there was backdated for the 4th from that perspective, if you will. You know what I mean? That specific part of what that was backdated, because there was two separate agreements. There was that one was the amending of the agreement for his contract about they would get their money back. And then there was one specifically dealing with the bail agreement, right? So I don't think they gave Tupac a copy of that. And the reason why I say that is because Charles Ogletree, if you look right here, Charles Ogletree wouldn't be asking David Kenner for the one that was signed in prison. And Tupac would have been able to give Charles Ogletree the one that was formally signed, if you will. You see what I'm saying? If Tupac had Charles Ogletree working for him, then he would have asked, he would say, hey, give me your paperwork. They didn't give it to Tupac. They didn't give it to him. And so that's how I know, and I can see through that from that perspective. So once again, the outright silence, diversions, and outright misrepresentations, right? This is the overall brewing situation. Most people don't know this. Most people don't know that Tupac had another lawyer working against, or not against, should I say, but in his best interest outside of what people thought David Kenner had meant to him from that perspective. And so this is very important. This goes to show you, okay, in understanding it, because remember, that agreement didn't pop up until after Tupac died. Years and years after Tupac died. You know what I mean? That bail agreement and all of those other things. Tupac didn't have a copy of that. He didn't. Now, whether Tupac, because like I said, he was under death row for only 11 months. Whether Tupac had came home, and really just started to work and got caught up. Because sometimes you can overlook that. You know what I mean? But you know that it's there because you know that you signed it. As to why, and when you think about it, you can see how they were holding it, right? The silence, the diversions, and outright misrepresentations. So, in Charles Ogletree asking for the one that was signed in prison on the piece of paper, the handwritten one, right? David Kenner knew that about the other one too. And so, like I said, he didn't give a copy of that to Tupac. They didn't give a copy of it to Tupac. And so as you move on with the information and you understand that, right? Then you see this. Then you say, well, damn, hold on. What was that? Charles Ogletree, was also handicapped in his efforts to carry out Tupac's instructions to settle some of his numerous civil lawsuits, right? And the reason why he was handicapped is because of money. Tupac came out of jail with no money. He would say, I want to take care of this case. I would negotiate a settlement. He would say, good, Death Row has my money. Tell them to send the check, right? So what Tupac is thinking at that particular time is that, and you see right here, if Mr. Ogletree is telling what he's saying, hey, you know what? Good, Death Row has my money. Tell them to send the check. This also tells me that Tupac really didn't understand what he had signed. I mean, just to be I gotta be perfectly honest. You know what I mean? Or what's like, I wouldn't say understand what he didn't sign, but like I say, they didn't give him the, because like I said, a lot of times, hey man, you gotta sign this, you gotta sign that. This is why I always make it a point when you handling business, make sure you get a copy of what you're signing the day that you sign it. You know what I mean? You never sign anything and be like, oh, I'll get you a copy later. No, I need a copy now. You need to go run a copy off right now. And what's the name? So this tells me, in Tupac thinking, right? Like he said, Mr. Ogletree said, he would say, I want to take care of this case, meaning settle the case. Mr. Ogletree said he would negotiate a settlement. He would say, good. Tupac would say, Death Row has my money. Tell them to send the check. He said when the check didn't come, Ogletree continued, right? I would tell Kenner. He would say, it's in the mail. Then, when it never arrived, he would say he was sending it FedEx. Then, when it didn't arrive, he would say he'd wire it. Ogletree added, we would have been able to close the deal, right? We should have been able to close the deal, but it was never possible. we had to go through the record company, right? It was as though he had no life except that given to him by death row. Now, you see what was going on? And so, if Tupac, this is what tells me, because he signed that agreement, right? In all intents and purposes, he signed that agreement that gave him, that gave Interscope through Out the Gutter that I showed you guys before. He gave them the power of attorney, right? I'm telling you, I guarantee you 155% that Tupac didn't get a copy of that agreement. And it made it seems like, hey, Pac, you got to sign this. This is for Interscope in the bail situation, and read it, whatever. And whether Tupac cared or not, and this is just business. It ain't got nothing to do with being personal. One must handle their business and understanding what that is and what that means. Because when you look at this, Charles Ogletree, he's fighting diligently. You know what I mean? He's trying to get to the bottom of it. You know what I mean? Ogletree said he was handicapped in his efforts to carry out Tupac's instructions to settle some of the numerous civil lawsuits. When Tupac had came out of jail with no money. And like I said, they had gave Tupac money already. Interscope had gave Tupac money in order to fight the case for what he was in jail for, right? And to hire Charles Ogletree to represent him on the appeal. So like I said, when they was telling you that, David Kenneth was representing, Tupac on the appeal, and he could have sent Pac back to jail. That's why he didn't want to fire David Kenneth. All of that wasn't true, as you can see clearly right here. Charles Ogletree was the guy who was really, truly, honestly representing Tupac in his best interest to be able to settle lawsuits, as well as him to be able to understand the paperwork and the contract. And like I said, they would never send it over. They wouldn't. So in fact, Tupac didn't even have a copy of the contract that he signed in prison. This lets you know. Why you said, well, how do you know? You got to look at it for what it's worth, right? You got to look at it for what it's worth. Look. You said what? What did Charles Ogletree ask for? Right? Ogletree continued to represent him as well. Ogletree told me that he repeatedly wrote letters to Death Row asking to see the contract Tupac had signed with Death Row in prison, and to negotiate a formal contract under more conscionable circumstances, right? So now, they didn't send it. Right? But all his efforts, not some of them, all his efforts, he said, were met with silence, diversions, and outright misrepresentations. So my thing is, like I said, in Interscope being right next door to Death Row at this particular time that was going on, you could try to understand some of the shenanigans that were happening if it was being fully communicated from David Kenneth to Interscope what was going on. Now that possibly could have not been the case, but as you see, they was really playing with Tupac from that perspective. Because like I said, and Charles, all of those, everything, the request that Charles Ogletree made to David Kenneth in order to be able to see the contract, in order to be able to try to settle some of the cases that Tupac had going on from that perspective after he had, he was selling all of these records. And like I said, whether it was an advance or, like I said, the money that he was receiving, according to Frank Alexander, the little $5,000 or whatever he was receiving, as a monthly stipend or weekly stipend, if you will, it should have been handled, but it didn't get handled. And this was the beginning of the end right here. You can clearly see that Tupac is asking, through his lawyer, the contract that I signed in prison. Tupac didn't have a copy of that. He didn't. He didn't have a copy of that other one either, involved that bail situation. And I don't know how they presented it to him, because he sometimes, the record companies and lawyers, they slick. They'll be like, hey, sign this right here and ba-da-da-da-da-da. You want to be able to sit down and read, what it is that you're signing and not be signing your life away, right? And yeah, that's what it seemed like to me. And once again, when that contract was signed, not the one in jail, but the one, the formal one, right, that we did on the Art of Dialogue, when that one was signed, that should have been something that was sent to Charles Ogletree, because Charles Ogletree would then now simply bypass death row and go straight to Interscope like Afeni did when Tupac died. That's when that contract came out. That's when that information about when Tupac died, that's when it was known, oh, this is what really went down. This is, oh no, he wasn't really signed to death row. He was signed over here, you know. And so, man, it's kind of sad, actually. You know what I mean? It's like, what really was the reason that they, didn't communicate with Charles Ogletree in this situation right here? What was the reason that they didn't do it? Ogletree also was handicapped, right, in his efforts to carry out Tupac's instructions to settle some of his cases, right? Look, trying to get the money, Tupac telling them death row has my money, tell them to send the check, right? And then you go and look into everything else that we talked about as far as the house and none of that being in Tupac's name. Can you only imagine? He's trying to, settle legal cases and things like that, and his lawyer is just being met with straight out misrepresentation, lies, diversions, and straight up silence. Yeah. Yo, tell me what you guys think about this in the comments, man. Like I said, I always like to come with the straight game and subjects that are gonna help you understand what was really going on behind the scenes, despite what people are trying to make it seem like, what was going on. Your boy DELRAY, straight game.